Marijuana was an issue in a few states, and take a look at this. We now have the results. In the state of Oregon, legalizing marijuana for recreational use has been approved, 54%, 46%. In Oregon, the measure would legalize personal possession, manufacture, sale of marijuana for persons 21 years of age or older within specific limits, and create a commercial regulatory system for the production, distribution, and sale of marijuana in Oregon. Washington State, Colorado already have that. In Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, legalizing marijuana decisively approved. 69% say yes, 31% say no. Possessing up to 2 ounces of marijuana for personal use is now legal. Whole bunch of other stuff they've approved as well. Washington, D.C., legalizing marijuana. In Florida, there was a measure to allow medical marijuana to be used. It needed 60% to get approval. It got 58%. You can see over there, so it doesn't get approved in Florida. Allowing medical marijuana goes down, but it does get approved recreational marijuana in Oregon, Washington State, and Anderson, Alaska has a similar measure on the boards right now. They haven't closed the polls in Alaska, so we don't know yet how they decided what to do with marijuana, but it clearly has been approved now. Not only exists in Washington State, in Colorado, but you can see now in the District of Columbia as well as in Oregon.
Let's talk about with our panel. Is it a surprise really for anyone here, both in D.C. and also in Oregon? No. What are you all stoned? Slow people, quick, come on.
I don't know. What about you? What do you think?
No, dude.
Okay. Who would win in a race, Batman or Superman?
We need Randy Kay for this one.
That's right, yes, Randy Kay. Yeah. No one really has any opinions on Pato. On this side, anything?
I'm surprised that if you said to me, well, as between recreational and a medicinal purpose, which one failed, I would have said, well, it would be the recreational that would have failed somewhere. The fact that in Florida, they said no to medical marijuana. You know, there are a lot of folks in Florida who I would think could use that medicinal value. So that should be the one that failed surprises me.
Yeah, the fact that in Oregon, which saw recreational use of marijuana, obviously that's a big step. Although in Oregon, we've seen a number of ballot initiatives like that which don't exist elsewhere in the country.
Part of the reason it failed in Florida, though, is because in Florida, that ballot amendment required 60% of the vote, which is a high threshold. And it just didn't get there.
My recollection, and Anna, you would know better than I, is that Charlie Crist's law partner, law colleague, was a protagonist for getting that.
This is why I love the man whose last name I can't pronounce. He's bringing Charlie Crist back up.
Do not get Anna started on Charlie Crist.
But I think that, and you would know better than I, but I think that the whole motivation really was to put it on the ballot so as to benefit Crist, because the person who would come out and be supportive of that
younger voters
would be a likely Crist supporter, but it failed.
So he lost on 2 counts.
One of the interesting questions about the marijuana initiative, the recreational use in Washington, D.C., is since the House of Representatives and the Senate control Washington, D.C. in so many ways, are the Republicans going to try to block that, or is there going to be more deference to the libertarian bent? And the fact that some of these senators, such as newly elected Senator-elect Gardner from Colorado, perhaps the Republican out of Alaska, we don't know yet, are going to be from states where it is legal. So that's an open question. Are Republicans going to step in and say, no, you can't do that, Washington?
And maybe bipartisanship will spring eternal as a result, right?
Pass the Ducey on the left and the right-hand side.
Filed at the 80s. Yes. Kevin, do you think it's likely Republicans would actually step in?
I think Jake's point is right, that they would actually defer more to the libertarian side of it. I don't think it's, obviously, it's not a priority. I also think inside of D.C., this argument was made with the criminal justice element in mind, that so many young people are going to jail and so many of the courts are backlogged because we have these what people see as minor drug offenses. And so I think that there are a number of Republicans that are increasingly more interested in some of those criminal justice reforms as well.
Well, I'll tell you what happened in Florida is, knowing that it was going to be on the ballot and that it was going to be an issue, the Florida legislature addressed it in their last session and passed a medical marijuana law. It's called Charlotte's Web, and it passed. And so I think that was also what took part of the wind out of the sails out of this amendment.
I think we have another projection. Let's go to Will for that.
We got a projection on raising the nation's minimum wage in several states. Take a look at this. In Arkansas right now, raising the minimum wage to $8.50 an hour by the year 2017. That passes. 65% so far to 35%. 73% of the vote is in, so they're going to raise the minimum wage from $7.25 nationwide to $8.50 in Arkansas. In Illinois, similarly, raising the minimum wage to $10 an hour in 2015. That passes as well. 67%, 33%, 96% of the vote is in, raising the minimum wage in Illinois. Similar measures were on the ballot in other states as well. Let's take a closer look. In Nebraska, similarly, it passes. They're going to raise the minimum wage to $9 an hour by the year 2016. 59%, 41%. So they're going to raise the minimum wage in Nebraska. And in South Dakota also, they're going to raise the minimum wage right now at $7.25 nationwide to $8.50 an hour by the year 2015, which is obviously next year or so. Those are all important measures that were protected. Take a look at Nebraska. We got Nebraska also. They raised the minimum wage to $9 per hour in 2016. That's Nebraska. And there's another measure in Colorado that went down to feet. This was a measure in Colorado that defined personhood, a controversial measure that would amend the state constitution to include unborn babies under the definition of person in the Colorado Criminal Code. So right now, the definition of personhood, that amendment in Colorado goes down to defeat. All right, let's take a look at the Senate right now. Here's where it stands. As you know, 52 Republicans at a minimum. They will be the majority in the next United States Senate. The Democrats right now have 45. The Republicans needed 51. They got more than 51. So they will be the majority in the Senate. You see Virginia. Louisiana is going to go to a runoff in December. We'll see what happens in Louisiana. Virginia, still too close. But those measures, raising the minimum wage, rejecting that personhood amendment in Colorado, legalizing marijuana, lots of other stuff going on, Anderson.
That's right. We're also joined, I should introduce Michael Smerconish and Peter Hamby, who we haven't heard from a lot tonight, just coming out and joining on the panel. Just to get your thoughts, Michael, on what you've seen play out over the last several hours.
Drubbing would be the word I would use. It wouldn't be shellacking in this cycle, but it exceeds. I thought it would be. I think we all expected it was going to be a big Republican night. I didn't expect it to be as significant as it's turned out. The surprise for me is the success at the gubernatorial level, with the exception being my home state of Pennsylvania. There was a lot more, I think, to that story, but Tom Corbett, a Republican, as a matter of fact, the first governor to be defeated running for re-election in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania since we allowed that process to take place. So PA, an outlier, but the success that Republicans have had at the governor's level is, I think, the story of the night, in addition to the Senate.
Peter, you spent a lot of time covering these races on the road.
Yeah, and my home state of Virginia is still not called. I know we've been talking about that a lot tonight. I was talking to a bunch of Democrats in Virginia who have worked on campaigns there for the last cycle, who are being very critical of Mark Warner, saying that he ran a strategy based on kind of his 2001 romantic notion of how he won the governorship back then. He spent the last 3 weeks of that race campaigning in Southwest Virginia with John Warner. That state, used to be sort of a, Southern Democratic swing state. Now, this is a base turnout state. Look how Terry McAuliffe won in 2013 in the governor's race last year. He brought in President Obama to run up the African-American vote in Hampton Roads, in Richmond, in Northern Virginia. Mark Warner didn't do that. Not to say he didn't take this race for granted. One Democrat said he comes as close to Jesus in Virginia Democratic politics as you can possibly get. But, he ran a dated campaign, and Democrats are being very critical that he ran this campaign and that we're still, waiting for a call.
And let's just take a quick look at the numbers in both those races. Virginia, Mark Warner had 12,479 to Ed Gillespie, with 95% of the vote counted already there. Although I think Ed Gillespie, surprising a lot of people with the race that he ran.
Right. So it's a combination of sort of, underwhelming Democratic turnout, but also Warner didn't really define Ed Gillespie. I talked to one Democrat who said the contrast was there. He didn't go negative on it. Remember what happened with Terry McAuliffe last year? He went hard negative on Ken Cuccinelli, the Republican, portraying him as sort of the social crusader to drive down his margins in Northern Virginia. They kind of left Ed Gillespie alone. I was watching Monday Night Football last night, and they started dropping the negative ads on him, but only in the last weekend. Remember, there was also a competitive House race in Northern Virginia, and Ed Gillespie sort of outperformed Ken Cuccinelli in Northern Virginia. So it's a confluence of factors. Obviously, the national environment was troublesome. But this reaffirms, though, that Virginia, we refer to it as a blue state, and we've been referring to Iowa and Colorado as blue states.
They're perfect.
Still a swing
No.
state.
Yeah, they're
Totally.
perfect.
Yeah.
Didn't Ed Gillespie say it's okay to call the Redskins, though? That
Yes.
was his big moment. I mean, I think you can make the case that not only Warner, but other Democrats ran the old race from 2012, and just segmenting their constituencies, including women in Colorado, which failed for them, and that it was the Republicans who improved their ground game, who figured out ways to get their voters out, and took a page from the Democrats' playbook and then beat them at it because they were aided by the unpopularity of this president, even though nobody likes Republicans either.
We're not talking enough, I don't think, about what a lot of these Republicans ads talked about a lot, which were things that Americans were scared of.
Right.
There were a lot of ads that talked about ISIS. There were a lot of ads that talked about Ebola. And if you looked at the exit polls, had most Americans afraid of a terrorist attack
More
in
than
this
70%.
country. Yeah, and so Republicans played into that, obviously, but there was a concern about the competence of the Obama administration
Totally.
with the crisis of ISIS, with the crisis of Ebola. You have polls indicating that two of the most nonpartisan, or at least perceived as nonpartisan, government agencies, the Centers for Disease Control and the U.S. Secret Service, both of whom have taken huge hits in the last few months, that there were questions about them.
Right.
So I talked to a Republican strategist involved in a bunch of these races who said to me that the turning point in this campaign, in their numbers, was when the president said he had no strategy on ISIS, and that they could see a shift in their numbers, and
moment.
Democrats say the same thing.
We've got to take a quick break. We're going to be looking at the tea leaves for the presidential race. Now the Republicans have new power in their hands. The lessons for 2016 ahead. We'll be right back.